Welcome everybody to My Life, My Business. Wish I was here, and also a very special welcome to my co-host, Dr. Shanaz Hussain, who is joining me for today. And as usual, we share topics around, um, just inspirations to help you engage with your life in a way that leaves it filled with joy, endurance, presence, and also traveling this journey that we call life with the people around you. So, enjoying those connections. So, what we have been talking about on sort of alternate weeks is on the one part telling stories that we find in the Bible that inspire us in some way, shape, or the other, and we share it, and we challenge you to find a nugget or two that will inspire you to take action in the direction that you are traveling. Last week, Shana spoke about once again as a follow on the do-it-yourself brain surgery, but talking from Caroline Leaf's book. And last year she spoke about the gather process, gathering your thoughts. Uh, on our recording that we published on YouTube under the Mufasa coaching practice, we call it Stop and Think, So it's about pausing and just reassessing, having moments of thinking about the way you're thinking and then looking for opportunities to change them. So anyway, you can go and listen to that. It's really wonderful sharing from Shanaz. And this week, I want to talk about the story of Deborah and Jael, and tongue in cheek, titled "How Milk and Honey Defeated the Enemy in the Promised Land Flowing with Milk and Honey." So hopefully I can land this one for you, which is quite clear why I make this reference. And what's the background to the story, in essence? So very briefly, there were judges in the land before King Saul was elected by Israel. Before then, they had judges, and the judges that I want to talk about just briefly, not too in too much detail, that leads us to the story of Deborah and then Jael, is there was a judge called Ehud. I hope I pronounce it correctly, but let's just go with it. And he ruled when Eglon, king of Moab, had power over Israel. Now, Ehud found a way sort of to assassinate the king and then led an army that killed 10,000 Moabites. After he did this, the land had peace for 80 years. And what's interesting is every time there's peace in the land, what brings on the enemies into the land of Israel to they would do evil, commit evil acts in the sight of God. And who followed Ehud was Shamgar, who saved Israel from the Philistines. Him, in his personal capacity, he struck down 600 Philistines with an ox goad. Now, an ox goad is a type of a cattle prod. It's a long wooden rod, sometimes with a metal tip, and he killed personally 600 Philistines. And he led the armies of Israel and saving them from invasion of the Philistines and so forth. So after Shamgar passed away, the Bible quite clearly tells us in Judges, and this is where I'm taking this from, Judges chapter 4, is that the Israelites once again did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And when this happened, they were sold into the hands of Jabin, which was a king of Canaan. And the Israelites eventually cried out to the Lord for help because they were cruelly oppressed for 20 years. Now, Sisera was a commander of Jabin's army. Bible says he had about 900 iron chariots, and he was the one who perpetrated this cruelty. And as is one, God heard, and at the time, uh, Deborah, who was a prophetess, was leading Israel. She was the wife of Lapidoth, and the Bible also says she was a mother. Don't know how many kids she had. And Deborah's name means bee. And what was interesting, she sat under a honey tree where she dispensed the sweetness of justice as she held court. So this is amazing. Her name means bee, and she loved sitting under this tree. Israel remained incapable of united action until Deborah summoned them to the Lord's battle. And when she did this, the response was only sort of 50% of all the 12 tribes responded, rallied to her call. But the backstory was when this was happening and under this oppression, she sent for a man named Barak, and Barak means thunderbolt, and thunderbolt is to be the Lord's flashing sword, and so, the irony of that name will quickly reveal itself. So she said to Barak when he arrived after she summoned him, she says, "Take with you 10,000 men to Mount Tabor." And she took it upon herself that she says she will lure Sisera, which was the commander of this Canaanite king's army. She will lure him to a place called the Kishon River and give him into Barak's hands. Now, here's the interesting part. Barak insisted that Deborah must go with him. Otherwise, he will not lead the army against the Canaanites. And it's so I should stop saying the word interesting, but here was the contradiction. Thunderbolt to be the Lord's flashing sword, and suddenly he shows, and yes, let me tell you why he did this. He feared Sisera so much so that his courage deserted him. And you know why? Due to the lack of trust in the Lord. And Rebecca said to him, "Fine, I'm going to come with you. But let me just warn you that the honor will go to a woman for defeating Sisera and the army." And so it transpired that the Lord routed Sisera and his army, and Sisera abandoned his army to such an extent and fled on foot. So, and the Bible tells us that all of Sisera's troops were killed. Enter another, let's say, we used to call them main O's, protagonists, when I was growing up. But enter another main O, and it's not gender specific, and her name is Jael. Now, remember now that he is now running away. This is now this feared commander of the Canaanite army, right? Sisera. So Sisera is now running away, looking for some sort of place to hide. And Jael was the wife of, and I'm going to just go with the pronunciations again, was the wife of Heber the Kenite. Now, Kenites were a clan of metal workers allied to the Israelites since the days of Moses. But Heber was allied to King Jabin, and he spied for Sisera. So Sisera fled to the tent of Jael, the Bible says, expecting a friendly reception. And that's exactly what he got. She welcomed him with a blanket, and when he says, "Please give me water, I'm so thirsty," she gave him in a special bowl filled with goat's milk, which he drank, and he was so exhausted that just before he fell asleep, he asked her to lie to Barak's army as to his whereabouts. She consoled him, and he fell asleep. While he was sleeping, she picked up a tent peg and hammer and drove the tent peg through his temple into the ground, and he died. Quite brutal. And because of this action, she was regarded as most blessed of women. In actual fact, in the song that Deborah that she sang with Barak, she does mention Jael in this way, that she's most blessed of women. But on that day, after Sisera was killed, God subdued Jabin, the Canaanite king, before the Israelites. Deborah and Barak broke out in song as they praised God and thanked him for the victory. And the Bible says they grew strong. The Israelites grew stronger and stronger until they completely destroyed Jabin and his kingdom. So you're going to ask me, so what is this all about? Oh, where does the milk come from? This is the point. The honey was comes from the bee, which is Deborah, but the milk was supplied by Jael. And so let's look at just lessons from both, what we can take from both Deborah and Jael, and I'll then summarize the overall takeaways. So, from Deborah's point of view, she shows that she showed aspects of leadership and wisdom. She led Israel with wisdom and fairness. And the point is, Shanaz, is that godly leadership is not about gender, but about faith, wisdom, and obedience to God. She also displayed courage and faith because she boldly called Barak to lead the army against the Canaanites, even when he hesitated out of fear. She trusted God's promise of victory and acted on it. She also showed encouragement and support. She motivated Barak, showing that great leaders inspire and support others in their calling. And she also really, demonstrated obedience to God's calling. She followed God's direction without fear, demonstrating once again the power of faith driven action. And then, to cap it all, she shows us the importance of worship and gratitude. After the victory, she composed a song of praise, teaching the importance of giving God credit for the success. She didn't claim it from a man's point of view. She understood that without God's power, his almighty power, victory was never going to be possible. And so, what were the lessons from Jael? Now, Jael showed courage in adversity. She took a bold step by killing Sisera, even though she was a housewife and not a warrior. And how did she do this? She used resources that were just available to her. And basically, as pointed out earlier, she used what she had, a tent peg and a hammer, to fulfill God's plan. And this shows that we don't need extraordinary tools to do God's work. And I mean, here's the just a moment to pause, and sometimes, um, we feel the calling on our lives. We have such an desire to do something quite big and to really leave a mark on the world. And then we say, oh, but I don't have this yet. I don't have the right equipment. I haven't been resourced yet. So I'm going to wait until I have those things to do. And the point here is that what is in your hands, what is available to you, use that, because you've been given that. And when God calls you, he's already looking to turn the kinds of things that you already have in your hands into something powerful and meaningful in terms of fulfilling his will. She also displayed, this is Jael, strategic wisdom. And she invited Sisera into a tent, which is quite, I mean, and he thought that because the husband was a spy, it just automatically will follow that the wife was also. Jael was absolutely loyal to the Israelites, as it's been for many, many years, and didn't follow her husband down the wrong path. So when she invited Sisera into her tent, she acted shrewdly, to defeat him in a way that no one expected. And just one last thing out of Jael's story is that God uses unlikely people, the ones that you would never suspect, but He can use anyone. So He's looking for availability, right? So she was not a soldier, of course not, but God used her to bring victory, reminding us that He can use anyone willing to act in faith. And so the overall takeaways, to sum it all up, and it doesn't matter, you know as a believer, it doesn't matter what it is you're focusing on, where God has placed you or where you find yourself, is that just a reminder, is that obedience to God leads to victory. Knowing what He wants for your life, knowing why you placed in the place that you find yourself. Remember, obedience to God leads to victory. Faith and courage are key to fulfilling God's purpose. God equips and uses people regardless of their background or status. But even if you have a background and a great academic background, even if your status is such either through important stations within the community or in government, or you're quite powerful captain of industry, yes, God will still use you, but you don't have to be any of those remarkable individuals to be used by God. He equips anybody when you are available. And then lastly, and this is maybe, and I'm talking to myself, is that no matter what challenge you face, what battle you have to fight. We spoke about David. I spoke about David and Goliath and that battle, defeating the giant Goliath. But generally, how we have to overcome every single day giants of fear, unbelief, and doubt is that when we do, just remember something, that God has empowered you, He has enabled you. Give Him the glory. Take that moment to point to Him and say thank you. So, giving glory to God should always be our response to victory. And this is how milk and honey defeated the enemy in the promised land, flowing with milk and honey. And that's the end of my story today.
Oh, that was amazing. That is really good. It was one of my favorite sort of Bible stories for a number of reasons. And yeah, you just brought it to life again today. So yeah, definitely a few things to think about.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I assume that you want me to mention what are the few things to
Well,
think
I tell
about.
you, absolutely, as usual. You can see I'm leaving enough time for that because,
Yeah.
just to discuss it. I mean, firstly,
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
as you
No.
highlight that, sorry, Shanaz, is tell us why it is your favorite story.
Okay, so the first reason why it's one of my favorite stories is that it was women were leading. Deborah apparently was leading, and they sort of before God appointed a king. And then it was also, she also states that it was through the hand of another woman that the victory was obtained. And the reason why this is one of my favorite stories is that, generally churches are quite okay with women being in the church. There are limited numbers of churches that allow women to take leadership position. And as you said, that leadership isn't dependent on does not depend on gender. And so this is one of the there are many stories of women taking leadership in church, but this is very obvious leadership. So for that reason, I think it's one of my favorite ones. And then another reason why it's one of my favorite ones, one of our former pastors, she has passed on now. And this used to be when I was young. I remember preaching about this. And in she would say regarding, and you pronounce well, they say Yael. So one of the reasons why I like this is that she used to say vang hulle met lus. So in other words, catch them with interest, right? So if you are, so I think for, if you are trying to win people over, then you want to, it's almost like be strategic. And and I remember her recalling, so he wanted water, she went like out of her way, she didn't just give him water, she gave him milk. So in other words, like, if there are times in our lives that we need to be strategic, and if we are wanting to influence, we've got to get out of our, sometimes we need to give people more than what they ask for in terms of to win them over. And so I just like the strategic thinking and wisdom of Yael in this place. in the story. And also, that's about the kind of leadership I think that she portrays in a society that isn't very kind to women at the time. And so she had to have a specific strategy in mind in order to do this. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, what strikes me, the story of the two men here. The one, despite his name, Barak, just I mean, when I tell the story, I'm always amazed that he didn't live up to his name. That despite the fact that God was asking him to do so, he needed her to join him in the battle, and refused, by the way, point blank. If she does not go, he will not go. And I look at that and I go, but why were you so fearful? Why? I mean, the God has proven himself over so many in over so many years, many years of his goodness, his power, his saving grace, and yet he judged as a man. He obviously respected Deborah. I mean, she was well known for how she was fair and dispensed judgment and so forth. But the second one is you call it Yael. I said jail. Yeah. So she, or let's talk about Sister of the Commander. And it was so clear that he thought by extension that because the husband was of the nature, loyal to the enemy king, and aligned himself, maybe even politically, thinking that it will work out well for them in the long run. Out of, I don't know what the motivation was, but he made the biggest assumption is that because her husband believed in a certain way, so she would also. And I think that's why he walked basically into a trap that killed him. It's because he just so underestimated her, that she was an independent human being with her own thoughts, with her own loyalties. She had her own value system, and based on integrity, but being so wise in how she dispensed with him. And I mean, he was a cruel man, this absolutely cruel. And to do what she did, you know, if you just pause long enough, I mean, you would kind of think it's quite violent in what she did, by knocking this tin peg right through the teeth temple, right into the ground, and she didn't even flinch, and she did that. And as far as I'm concerned, that even though she was not an Israelite, never mind about her not being a soldier, she was not an Israelite either, but she was aligned. She knew who to support, if you like. And I think with the obedience, with the faith in God by extension, there she was, not following in her husband's footsteps, and doing what we now remember her by. And even in the song that gives her honor and glory. In fact, Deborah led all of this, but victory, the entire victory is really, given to her. She is being proclaimed as the victor and not Barak. So yes, I just thought that when we talk about heroes or heroines, um, it's not gender specific, and to be remembered in this way for over the many years that the Bible has been in existence, it just shows you character, it shows you obedience, and so on. So you can see very much from where we started with the storytelling, that it's amazing what we're able to do when, despite our fear, we're courageous.
Yeah, and one of the other things that I really liked what you said, and I didn't think of the story in this way, because this when you mentioned about what is in your hand, so I'm always associating that phrase with Moses, but I hadn't really thought I thought of it relating to Deborah and Yael until you actually mentioned it, and I thought, yes, she used whatever she had. And often I think that when we want to take on big projects, but or things in terms of ministry wise, what I often find is that people, we think we need a lot of resources. And I really appreciated what you said, that that God will use what we are already doing, perhaps, or we already have access to, and we can build on that. And so I think sometimes we delay doing the obedience part, because we are thinking we need all these resources, when actually we already possess a lot of it. And it will actually, that conversation about the wisdom that we possess and that we already have it, is actually going to nicely tie in with next week, with what I'm thinking of.
Okay, no, that is wonderful. Well, that's a good note to end this conversation on. And thank you, Shanaz, for joining me this afternoon. And for those listening, thank you very much. It's very simply told, this story, but we hope that it stirs something in you, stirs your faith, and take the step boldly in the direction that God is leading you. So thank you, one and all. Until next week.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.